I was 32 when I finally understood that being the good son in my family meant nothing unless you were also the favorite. My name is Peter, and for most of my life, I believed that if I stayed quiet, worked hard, and avoided conflict, my parents would eventually see me the way they saw my sister Chloe. I was wrong. They didn't simply favor her, they admired her without question. She could damage something in the house, and they would excuse it as creativity. If I made a small mistake, it became proof of a personal flaw. That contrast defined our household. Chloe was the long awaited child, celebrated from the start. I came later, quietly filling space. She performed, I observed. She received lessons, camps, tutors, and a car at 17. I received secondhand items and reminders to be grateful. My father told people Chloe was destined for success while I was good with tools. When I earned a scholarship in mechanical engineering, he warned me not to get overconfident. After graduation, I built a steady career at a manufacturing firm. It wasn't impressive, but it was honest. Chloe, meanwhile, moved from one failed venture to another. Each time, my parents funded her next idea. They even refinanced their home for her business, which never succeeded. Still, I showed up. I fixed things, handled maintenance, helped whenever needed. In return, my mother praised Chloe's online following and asked why I was still single. I eventually stopped bringing anyone home after hearing my mother refer to my girlfriend as a charity case. Then my grandfather passed away. He was the only person who ever treated me as an equal. He was quiet, observant, and direct. We spent summers working together, repairing equipment, building furniture, fixing fences. He once told me patience was a craftsman's strength. I didn't fully understand that until later. The funeral was brief and formal, exactly how my father wanted it. Chloe arrived late, disengaged, and uninterested. Afterward, the lawyer contacted us about the will reading and mentioned a sealed letter. My mother dismissed it, but I knew my grandfather didn't waste words. At the lawyer's office, the will was read. My mother received household items. My father inherited valuables. Chloe was given the remaining liquid assets, millions. When my name was read, the lawyer paused before stating I was left $1. My parents mocked the gesture. Chloe dismissed it as favoritism. I said nothing. Then the lawyer announced a letter to be read aloud. In it, my grandfather directly addressed each of them. He criticized my parents' priorities, warned Chloe about her lack of honesty, and spoke to me with appreciation. He acknowledged my effort, respect, and consistency. He ended by saying there was a postscript meant only for me. Inside the smaller envelope was a short message. The dollar isn't the gift. Look beneath the roots. I immediately understood. The oak tree behind his farmhouse, the one we planted together. I drove there, searched beneath it, and found a metal box. Inside were documents and another note. The documents were property deeds. Multiple parcels of land, valuable and undeclared, transferred privately to me years earlier. My grandfather hadn't humiliated me. He'd protected me. I kept it quiet. Weeks passed. My parents and sister acted as if Chloe owned everything. She promoted development plans using Grandpa's name. I stayed silent until construction began on land that wasn't hers. When I confronted her, she dismissed me. Legally, the land belonged to me. Soon after, my parents filed a lawsuit claiming I manipulated my grandfather. Chloe supported it. Then my apartment was broken into. The box was stolen. When I confronted them, they didn't deny it. They justified it. That's when I understood this was never about misunderstanding. It was control. The legal battle followed. Lies were presented professionally. I told the truth plainly. The judge delayed judgment, but my family acted victorious. I began to doubt myself. Then I saw Chloe on television, rewriting my grandfather's values publicly. That's when resolve replaced grief. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. Returning to the property late one night, I noticed exposed roots again. Buried nearby was another small box. Inside was a brass key engraved with my grandfather's initials and a note. And that's when I realized he'd planned for even this. If you want. If they take what's yours, look where they never think to look. At the time, I didn't understand what it meant. Not fully. But something stirred again. A sense of direction. A puzzle waiting to be solved. The next morning, I brought the key to Henderson. He studied it carefully, turning it over in his hand. RW? He said quietly. Do you know what it opens? No, I answered. But I think I need to find out. He nodded. Whatever it is, Peter, he trusted only you with it. Over the following weeks, I kept my distance from everyone. My parents sent another legal notice demanding I stop interfering with the retreat project. Chloe continued her promotions, hosting influencer shoots at the partially built property, posting captions about gratitude and legacy. Each photo tightened something in my chest. Every rehearsed smile reminded me she had taken everything. After work, I began driving without direction. Back roads, familiar places my grandfather and I used to visit. Sometimes I parked by the river, sitting in silence with the key in my pocket, turning it over absent-mindedly. Then one night, a memory surfaced. When I was young, Grandpa kept a storage unit near the rail yard. He said it held scrap metal and spare parts. Once, when I asked about it, he winked and said, "That place holds more than rust, Pete." Back then, I thought he meant sentimental clutter. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I went there. The facility was nearly empty, doors rusted, numbers faded. I walked the rows until I saw it. Unit 47, faintly marked with RW. My hands shook as I slid the key in. It fit perfectly. When the door creaked open, dust filled the air. Inside were neatly stacked boxes labeled and organized. Tools, blueprints, ledgers, file folders. Against the far wall leaned a large frame covered with a tarp. I pulled it back and stopped cold. It was a detailed land map, not just Grandpa's property, but the surrounding area. Boundaries, underground water systems, zoning lines. In the corner, a county seal and signature block. He hadn't just owned farmland. He'd quietly acquired the mineral rights beneath it. That's when it all made sense. The roots. The beneath. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He'd hidden something tangible, something far more valuable than money. I stood there for a long time, absorbing it. Then I laughed softly, disbelief giving way to something close to tears. Grandpa had known they'd grab the obvious inheritance, so he buried the real value underneath. Even with that discovery, I wasn't ready to act. I didn't know how. My parents still controlled the narrative. I was still framed as the bitter son. Legal processes could drag on for years. So I waited. I worked. I saved. Life continued. Chloe's retreat opened for limited visits. Photos of cabins appeared online, manufactured rustic, overly designed, hollow. My mother gave interviews emphasizing family unity. My father stayed behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. I returned to the storage unit regularly, scanning records, organizing files, documenting everything. Slowly, I built something they couldn't see, a foundation of evidence, not emotion. Still, the sense of betrayal lingered. Nights were the hardest. Doubts crept in. You'll never win. She deserves more. Sometimes I woke with my phone in hand, halfway through a message to my mother I never sent. Other times I repeated Grandpa's words, "Patience is a craftsman's virtue." Gradually, pain shifted into purpose. By spring, something inside me thawed. The grief remained, but it no longer paralyzed me. I started my mornings early, coffee, a notebook, my laptop open to the growing archive of documents. I cross-referenced deeds, mineral rights, maps, and purchase agreements. What I uncovered was staggering. Over 30 years, Grandpa had acquired overlapping parcels extending far beyond what anyone realized. Forest land, water systems, abandoned quarries, all registered under a holding company he'd formed decades earlier, RW Resources LLC. It felt like discovering a second inheritance. The paperwork showed I not only owned the farmland Chloe built on, but also the subsurface rights beneath the retreat. She could build cabins, but she didn't own what lay below them. That was leverage. For the first time since the betrayal, power shifted. I rebuilt myself quietly. I started jogging again. I returned to woodworking, restoring old furniture in my garage. It grounded me. Each careful cut reminded me how Grandpa worked, methodical, deliberate. I also reconsidered my career. I'd spent years as a mechanical engineer at a modest manufacturing firm, stable but stagnant. Now, I revisited ideas I'd shelved, designs, efficiency models. I coded late into the night, channeling frustration into precision. One design, a compact irrigation pump for rural areas, gained attention after I shared a demo video. A small agricultural tech company offered to license it. The deal wasn't huge, but it gave me freedom. I left my job and launched a consultancy. While my family showcased their retreat, I built something tangible. Then developers began reaching out. The region was becoming valuable. A highway expansion was approved nearby. One company emailed asking about leasing rights tied to a quarry listed under RW Resources. They didn't know it was me, just the LLC. Henderson reviewed the message and smiled. This is bigger than you think. If handled correctly, this could become long-term income and keep your sister's project under your legal control. That mattered. Because while I rebuilt, Chloe expanded. The retreat went viral. Influencers arrived. Corporate wellness groups booked events. Magazines called her a visionary, continuing a family legacy. The truth was less polished. Contractors complained online about unpaid work. Public records showed mounting debt. The retreat survived on loans and sponsorships, not profit. Still, they projected success. I returned to the farm openly. Workers noticed. Word spread. Soon, Chloe called. "Why are you showing up at my retreat?" "Checking on my land," I replied. She laughed. "Your land?" "You should read your lease agreements," I said, "especially the parts about mineral rights." Silence followed. Then disbelief. Then the line disconnected. After that, their lawyers reached out again, this time cautiously. Henderson advised patience, so I focused on growth. My business expanded. I hired staff. My designs gained recognition. A local paper featured my company. Attention found me without effort. My mother texted after months of silence, "Glad you're finally doing something useful." I replied, "You mean the business built on my land?" No response. Chloe messaged next, "You're not going to win, Peter," but I wasn't trying to win anymore. That autumn, I hired a geological surveyor. The findings confirmed everything: valuable stone, high-quality clay, a long-term water source. Henderson grinned. If they continue operating, they're violating property law. So we waited. Eventually, proof surfaced, an influencer's live stream showing cabins built over the mapped spring. That night, we filed for an injunction. I stayed quiet. I worked. I thrived. The retreat began to crack under scrutiny. Contractors demanded payment. Banks tightened credit. Rumors spread. The truth carried its own weight. Months later, I stood beneath the oak tree again. Stronger. Weathered. Still standing. "I'm getting there, Grandpa," I whispered. And I was. If you want, I can. The retreat's hashtag collapsed almost overnight. I walked through the gate unnoticed, like someone who didn't belong to the moment. Staff glanced at me with polite uncertainty. To them, I was the younger brother who never really left town. I let that assumption stand. I wasn't there for attention. I wanted space, and I wanted the facts to arrive on their own. The moment I stepped onto the lawn, the energy shifted. Conversations paused, heads turned, eyes followed. Chloe noticed me at nearly the same time, and for a brief second, the color drained from her face. She raised a hand to her earpiece and spoke quickly, her voice low and tense. I watched her cling to performance, trying to stay composed as the edges began to crack. Henderson arrived quietly, as he always did. Calm. Precise. The kind of presence that didn't require theatrics. He handed a folder first to a county inspector who had just arrived, then to the retreat manager, and finally to the retreat's attorney. Elena sat near the front, focused and prepared, late like someone who had done the groundwork and come back with proof. Cameras started gathering across the lawn, local crews first, then national outlets that had picked up the story. The event organizer tried to push forward with the program. That was their training. Don't pause. Don't acknowledge the rumor. Don't let uncertainty spread. But you can't hide damage forever. Chloe stepped onto the stage for her keynote anyway. That was expected. She cleared her throat and tried to control the narrative. She spoke about allegations, cooperation, and transparency. The words were polished but uneven, and the microphone crackled. Questions from the crowd grew louder. Then a contractor, later identified as Miguel, stood and shouted from the back that his crew hadn't been paid in 2 months. His voice cut through the background music. The crowd turned. The quiet spread outward. At that moment, the county inspector spoke into his radio. Minutes later, uniformed officials crossed the grass. Environmental officers, not police, but clearly authorized. They didn't ask permission. They moved directly to the oak. The lead inspector surveyed the site and ordered an immediate halt pending sampling. The band packed up without comment. Guests were asked to remain where they were while documentation began. The retreat's lawyer muttered about timelines and injunctions, but Henderson's materials were already entered into the official process. When a stop work notice was posted on a visible support beam near the stage, the atmosphere changed instantly. What had been curated calm turned into open anxiety. Guests stood. Some demanded refunds. Others looked shaken. One man turned to his table mate and asked what they were supposed to do since he'd brought his mother for her birthday. Two influencers who had been live streaming began shouting into their phones, accusing the retreat of fraud. Their audio fed directly into the chaos. Chloe's carefully managed image began to unravel in real time. What stayed with me most was when her eyes found mine from the stage. For months, I had imagined this moment differently: arguments, speeches, confrontation. In reality, it was quiet and devastating. She looked like someone caught in a lie too large to deny. She mouthed words the microphone didn't capture. She tried to smile, and the expression collapsed halfway through. Our mother appeared beside her, moving as if searching for lines that no longer existed. Our father was gone. Later, I learned he'd retreated to his study, the place where he always withdrew when things moved beyond his control. Henderson stepped forward when the retreat's lawyer attempted to challenge jurisdiction. He spoke evenly, presenting maps, trust documents, environmental samples Elena had coordinated, and verified chains of custody. No raised voice, no declaration, just facts placed one after another. County officials reviewed the documents and began the administrative process to freeze operations and require remediation. That's when accountability shifted from possibility to motion. Chloe's public relations team rushed out statements about misunderstandings, good faith efforts, and temporary pauses. But contractors closed in. Miguel returned to the stage and addressed Chloe directly, reminding her of promises tied to sponsorship payments. He said his crew had trusted her and that he would take legal action if needed. He said his children needed to eat too. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Financial disputes don't translate well on a stage. The live feeds exploded. Clips were shared instantly. People started connecting details: permits, invoices, claims against Chloe's earlier posts about ethical sourcing. Sponsors were tagged and pressured. Within an hour, several issued cautious statements saying they were reviewing their involvement. Cancellations appeared on the retreat's booking platform, which had only recently opened registrations for expansion. I stayed near the oak. I felt the weight of everything my grandfather had hidden beneath it, and the irony that his plan had never been about revenge, but clarity, forcing the truth into view without spectacle. I didn't react. I watched. Chloe, our mother, trying to manage staff, the legal and environmental processes turning steadily. Just as Chloe opened her mouth again, the PA system went dead, not theatrically, but because power had been cut to protect monitoring equipment. Stage lights shut off. Daylight took over. Chloe stood frozen, one hand raised, the microphone silent. Guests murmured. Phones lifted again. The retreat's lawyer stepped forward, but was drowned out by accusations. Henderson placed a light hand on my shoulder, just enough to signal that the process was working. Elena was already sending footage to newsrooms. The inspector requested photographs. Each click documented another step. Messages flooded my phone: support, legal offers, media inquiries. I ignored them. I wanted to stay in that brief stillness where preparation finally met outcome. A police car arrived soon after, not because we called, but because someone reported a disturbance. With the story spreading nationally, officers were brought in for crowd control. They moved efficiently, checking IDs and giving instructions. Chloe looked between our parents, the oak, and me. In her expression was disbelief and a dawning understanding that nothing here could be easily repaired. A helicopter hovered above. Cameras multiplied. Contractors demanded payment. Officials collected samples. Guests argued. Chloe stood on a darkened stage as everything closed in. I moved toward the platform. People made space. An older man I recognized from years back squeezed my arm and said quietly that I'd done right by my grandfather. Then he disappeared into the crowd. I stepped onto the stage beside Chloe. She turned to speak. Before she could, the microphone flickered once. The county inspector's voice came through, citing the statute that halted operations immediately and warned of civil and criminal consequences. For a moment, everything held. Then the noise returned. Chloe looked at me, stripped of performance. I had many words prepared. I chose one sentence. I said she had always been free to choose the truth, and she had chosen otherwise. The crowd surged forward. Reporters, staff, officials. The platform became an island. Helicopter blades beat overhead. Someone shouted that the clip was already everywhere. At the edge of the property, unfamiliar men headed toward the farmhouse. I saw our father at a window. I didn't follow him. I stayed where I was, unexpectedly calm. The oak behind me moved in the wind, ancient and indifferent. The air smelled of earth and cedar. Then I heard my mother call my name. Quiet, uncertain. For a moment, I considered going to her. Then I stayed still. Accountability was unfolding. Not loudly, but thoroughly. A county official handed me a slip of paper requesting my presence for a formal statement regarding ownership and custody. Routine words, serious meaning. I folded it and nodded. As I turned to leave, Chloe begged me not to. Cameras captured her braking. I walked past without looking back. There was still work ahead: legal filings, remediation, public management. But for the first